On November 9, 2023, Brent Brewer was executed by the state of Texas. He was 53 years old. The method was chemical injection. His case brought into sharp focus the complex and often troubling aspects of capital punishment in the United States. It particularly highlighted the controversial role of certain types of expert testimony used to predict a defendant's future behavior. Specifically, Brewer's execution reignited debate over the use of what critics call junk science in determining who lives and who dies on death row. This testimony centered on the concept of future dangerousness. Please like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. The crime for which Brent Brewer was sentenced to death occurred on April 26, 1990. The victim was 66-year-old Robert Laminack. Laminack had offered a ride to the then 19-year-old Brewer and his girlfriend. This seemingly simple act of kindness turned deadly. During the ride, Brewer attacked Laminack. He stabbed him in the neck with a butterfly knife. The motive for the attack was robbery. Brewer took approximately $140 from the victim. Laminack sustained severe injuries. The knife wound struck both his carotid artery and jugular vein. He quickly lost consciousness. Robert Laminack bled to death as a result of the attack. Evidence linking Brewer to the crime was significant. His bloody fingerprints were found on the knife used in the stabbing. His fingerprints were also located inside Laminack's truck. This evidence was central to his conviction. Texas law sets specific requirements for imposing the death penalty. Two primary conditions must be met. First, the defendant must have committed a capital crime. The murder of Robert Laminack during the commission of a robbery qualified as a capital offense under Texas law. Second, the prosecution must prove that there is a reasonable belief the defendant poses a future danger to society. This second requirement is often the subject of intense legal and ethical debate. In Brent Brewer's case, the capital nature of the crime was not disputed. The central legal battleground became the state's assertion of his future dangerousness. Proving this potential for future violence is a unique and controversial aspect of the Texas death penalty statute. It requires predicting human behavior, a task fraught with uncertainty. The state's ability to convince a jury of this future danger is paramount. Without it, a capital conviction results in a life sentence, not death. To establish Brent Brewer's future dangerousness, the prosecution presented various forms of evidence. This included testimony about his prior actions. They introduced evidence of what were termed prior bad acts. These were presented to suggest a pattern of behavior indicative of future violence. Specific acts mentioned included possession of a knife. An assault on his stepfather was also presented. Additionally, an assault on his high school girlfriend was cited. These incidents were used to paint a picture of a violent individual. A key component of the prosecution's case was expert testimony. They called psychiatrist Dr. Richard Coons to the stand. Dr. Coons offered a prediction about Brewer's future behavior. He testified that Brewer would likely join a prison gang and continue to engage in violence if sentenced to life. Crucially, Dr. Coons provided this testimony without ever having examined Brent Brewer. His assessment was based solely on reviewing case materials. Dr. Coons' methodology has faced significant criticism over the years. The American Psychiatric Association has disavowed the ability of psychiatrists to reliably predict future dangerousness in this manner. The reliability of Dr. Coons' testimony was later challenged in other cases. In 2010, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ruled his testimony in a different case was unreliable. This later ruling cast a long shadow over the validity of his previous testimony, including that used against Brewer. It raised serious questions about the foundation of Brewer's death sentence. The defense vigorously challenged the state's presentation of future dangerousness. They argued that Dr. Coons' testimony constituted junk science. They contended that this unreliable testimony unfairly prejudiced the jury. It presented a speculative and unproven prediction as scientific fact. The defense also presented evidence counteracting the state's narrative of future danger. They highlighted Brewer's deep remorse for the crime he committed. They pointed to his behavior during his decades in prison. For over 30 years, Brewer maintained a record of good conduct. His time incarcerated included participation in a faith-based program. This was presented as evidence of rehabilitation and personal change. The defense argued that the Brent Brewer facing execution was not the same reckless 19-year-old who committed the crime. They asserted he had matured and was no longer a threat. This clash of narratives, state predicted future danger versus defense presented rehabilitation and remorse, was central to the sentencing phase. The jury ultimately sided with the state's prediction. Brent Brewer was initially convicted and sentenced to death in 1991. This first trial established his guilt and imposed the ultimate penalty. However, his case did not end there. It entered the lengthy and complex process of appeals. In 2007, the U.S. Supreme Court intervened. They overturned Brewer's death sentence. The reason for the overturn was based on a legal principle established in other cases. Juries in Texas capital cases had not been properly instructed on how to consider mitigating factors. Mitigating factors are circumstances that might lessen a defendant's moral culpability or argue against the death penalty. Examples include a history of child abuse or evidence of mental illness. The Supreme Court found that the jury in Brewer's original trial lacked the necessary framework to give full effect to any mitigating evidence presented. This required a new sentencing trial. Brewer's resentencing trial took place in 2009. The state again sought the death penalty. Despite the presentation of mitigating evidence and arguments against future dangerousness, the outcome was the same. Brewer was again sentenced to death. Following the 2009 resentencing, Brewer's legal team continued their appeals. A key focus was the controversial testimony from Dr. Coons. Brewer's lawyers alleged that false and discredited testimony had been presented at the 2009 trial. They argued that using testimony later deemed unreliable violated his rights. They brought this claim before the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. This court is the highest state court for criminal matters. However, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals dismissed the appeal. They did so without reviewing the merits of the junk science claim itself. The court ruled that the claim should have been raised earlier in the legal process. This procedural ruling prevented a substantive review of whether the discredited testimony impacted the 2009 sentence. Brewer's legal team then sought intervention from the U.S. Supreme Court. They asked the nation's highest court to review the junk science claims. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear the case. This decision effectively exhausted Brewer's federal appeals regarding the reliability of the testimony used against him. With legal avenues closing, the final hope rested with the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. This board has the power to recommend commuting a death sentence to life or granting a temporary reprieve. Brewer's lawyers petitioned the board. They presented arguments about his rehabilitation, remorse, and the flawed nature of the evidence used to predict his future dangerousness. The board's vote was unanimous. They voted 7-0 against recommending clemency or a reprieve. This decision cleared the way for the execution to proceed. The legal and administrative processes had run their course. On November 9, 2023, Brent Brewer was put to death. In his final moments, he offered last words. He expressed remorse directly to the victim's family. He stated that he was not the same person he was in 1990. Brewer voiced hope that his execution might bring some peace to the Laminack family. His words reflected the defense's argument of transformation over 3 decades. The victim's family was present at the execution. Deborah Corbin, Robert Laminack's daughter, spoke afterwards. She described the impact of her father's murder on their family. She stated that their family had felt like they were in prison for 33 years. Corbin expressed a sense of release following the execution. She said they felt released today. The prosecutor involved in the case, Randall County District Attorney Robert Love, also commented. He defended the state's actions. Love denied that false testimony was presented at trial. He suggested that Dr. Coons' testimony, even if later questioned, was not material to the jury's verdict. This assertion contrasts sharply with the defense's view. The defense maintained that the prediction of future violence was a critical factor in the jury's decision to impose death. The finality of the execution means these conflicting perspectives on the fairness of the process can never be fully resolved for Brent Brewer. His case is closed. The case of Brent Brewer raises profound questions about the administration of capital punishment. It particularly highlights issues surrounding the evidence used to justify a death sentence. The reliance on expert testimony to predict future dangerousness is inherently problematic. The case underscores the potential for flawed or unreliable science to influence life or death decisions. It calls into question the standards of scientific rigor applied in capital trials. Should testimony from methodologies disavowed by professional associations be admissible? A case also forces a consideration of mitigating factors and the possibility of rehabilitation. Brewer's decades of good behavior and participation in programs raise the question of whether a person's capacity for change should be given greater weight. The procedural dismissal of Brewer's appeal regarding the junk science is also concerning. It suggests that even if evidence used to secure a death sentence is later discredited, procedural hurdles can prevent its reevaluation. This raises ethical questions about the legal system's commitment to accuracy and fairness, especially when a life is at stake. Should procedural rules trump the potential use of unreliable evidence in capital cases? Ultimately, the Brent Brewer case serves as a stark reminder of the irreversible nature of the death penalty. Errors in judgment, reliance on questionable evidence, or failure to fully consider mitigating circumstances cannot be corrected after an execution. It fuels the ongoing debate among ethicists, legal scholars, and advocates. They question whether a system capable of relying on junk science to predict future behavior can ever be truly just or reliable enough to wield the power of life and death.